My name is Diana Myers. I'm 28 years old, and 15 years ago, my own parents threw me out of the house when I was just 13. Last week, they showed up at my Uncle Harold's will reading, the man who raised me for the past 15 years, with confident smiles and a private attorney, absolutely certain they'd walk out with millions. But when attorney Margaret Morrison opened that sealed envelope and began reading, those smiles vanished. And when she reached Clause 7, my mother, the woman who once declared I was no longer her daughter, shot to her feet, her face chalk white, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. Before I tell you what happened next, if you enjoy stories about justice and family boundaries, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. To understand why my mother reacted that way, I need to take you back to the summer of 2010, when I was a 13-year-old girl who believed she was the root cause of every problem in her family. Growing up in a modest house in Southeast Portland, I learned early that love in our family wasn't distributed equally. My father, Richard Myers, worked as an auto mechanic at a shop downtown. He was a man of few words, and most of those words agreed with whatever my mother said. My mother, Sandra, worked the checkout line at a grocery store and ran our household with the precision of someone who always knew exactly who deserved what. My sister Tiffany was 2 years older than me. She had Mom's golden blonde hair, Mom's bright blue eyes, Mom's easy laugh. Everyone said so. "Tiffany looks just like you did at her age, Sandra." And Mom would beam. I looked like our late grandmother, Dad's mother. Brown hair, brown eyes, quiet disposition. Mom never said it was a bad thing. She just never said much about me at all. The differences showed up everywhere. For Tiffany's 15th birthday, Mom threw a party with 15 guests, a 3-tier cake from the bakery on Hawthorne, and a karaoke machine rental. For my 13th birthday, 3 months later, it was the four of us around the kitchen table with a marked-down cake from the grocery store where Mom worked. The frosting said "Happy Birthday" with no name, a generic leftover from someone else's canceled order. I didn't realize what was happening until I was 12. That's when I discovered Tiffany had a college savings account that had been opened when she was 5 years old. 8 years of deposits, thousands of dollars. I asked Mom why I didn't have one. She looked at me like the question surprised her. "Tiffany needs money for college," she said. "You'll figure something out. You're good at adapting." That was the first time I understood my place in this family. I was the spare child, kept around but never truly wanted. The summer of 2010 changed everything. In April of that year, I applied for the Oregon STEM Summer Academy at Oregon State University. It was a 6-week residential program for students who showed exceptional promise in science and mathematics. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, room and board, materials. Total value: $4,200. I didn't tell anyone I applied. I'd learned not to get my hopes up out loud in that house. On May 15th, the acceptance letter arrived. Out of over 2,000 applicants from across Oregon, 50 students had been selected. I was one of them. For exactly one afternoon, I felt like I mattered. Then Tiffany found out about a performing arts camp in California that her drama teacher had mentioned. 3 weeks, no scholarship, price tag, $3,800. That night at dinner, Mom announced the solution she'd worked out in her head. "Diana, you'll decline that science thing. We can't afford to send both of you to summer programs, and Tiffany's camp will help her college applications." She said it like she was discussing meal planning, not crushing someone's dreams. I stared at my plate. The words came out before I could stop them. "No." The whole table went silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. "Excuse me?" Mom's voice dropped to that dangerous register I'd heard her use on store customers who tried to use expired coupons. "This scholarship isn't your money to redirect," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I earned this. It's mine." Mom looked at me like I'd transformed into a stranger right before her eyes. "If you can't sacrifice for this family," she said slowly, Then you're not part of this family. At 13, I thought she was just angry. I didn't realize she meant it literally. 3 days after that dinner, I came home from the public library to find my belongings packed into 2 black garbage bags sitting on the front porch. My mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked resolved, like someone who'd just finished an unpleasant chore. "I called Harold," she said. "He'll be here to pick you up. From now on, you're his problem." I stood there on the porch I'd known my entire life, trying to process what was happening. Behind Mom, I could see Dad in the hallway. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. I looked up at the second-floor window. Tiffany was watching from behind the curtain. When our eyes met, she stepped back into the shadows of her room. She didn't come down. I waited on that porch from 6 in the evening until 10 at night. 4 hours. My mother went back inside after the first 5 minutes. The porch light never came on. Uncle Harold lived in Seattle, 3 hours away. He drove through the night to get to me. When his gray Honda pulled into the driveway, I was still sitting on those garbage bags, knees pulled to my chest. He got out without saying anything at first, just walked up, looked at me, and wrapped me in a hug so tight I couldn't breathe. "From now on," he said quietly, "you have a home." That night, as we drove north through the darkness toward Seattle, I didn't know that my mother had signed a document before Uncle Harold left. I didn't know what it meant. I was just a scared kid staring out the window, wondering what I'd done wrong. It would take 15 years for that document to resurface, and when it did, it would change everything. Uncle Harold's house in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood wasn't large, but it felt enormous compared to the cramped space I'd occupied in my family's home. For the first time in my life, I had a room that was entirely mine. More importantly, I had someone who believed in me. Uncle Harold had built Myers Property Holdings from scratch, a commercial real estate company he'd started with a single small office building he'd purchased after working double shifts for 6 years. By 2010, he owned 8 properties across the Seattle metro area. He never married, never had children. When I arrived on his doorstep with nothing but 2 garbage bags, he didn't just take me in. He invested in me. Over the next 4 years, I poured myself into school. I graduated from Ballard High in 2014 as class valedictorian, president of the math club, with a 4.0 unweighted GPA. The University of Washington offered me admission with a partial scholarship to their Foster School of Business. By 2018, I had my bachelor's degree in finance, graduating summa cum laude with a 3.94 GPA. Uncle Harold had given me internship opportunities at Myers Property Holdings starting my sophomore year. I learned the business from the ground up: data entry, lease analysis, tenant relations, property assessments. In 2019, after 18 months at a Big Four-style accounting firm I'll call Mitchell and Partners, I earned my CPA certification. 1 year later, Uncle Harold offered me a position as controller. By 2021, I was CFO. On my 26th birthday, I managed a portfolio of 12 commercial properties with a combined value of $23.7 million. Uncle Harold sent me an email that day. I still have it saved. The subject line read, "To my daughter." The message was simple. You don't need to prove anything to the people who abandoned you, but you do need to prove to yourself that you're worthy. You have. Happy birthday, Diana. In 15 years, my biological family reached out exactly 3 times. The first was in 2012. My mother called Uncle Harold's phone, not mine, to ask for $5,000. Dad had lost his job at the auto shop. Times were hard. Surely Harold could help his own brother. Uncle Harold declined. He told me about the call afterward, his jaw tight. "They haven't asked about you once," he said. "Not how you're doing in school, not if you're okay. They just want money." The second contact came in 2016. Tiffany mailed me a wedding invitation. No personal note. No, "I hope you're well," just the formal printed card with my name and Uncle Harold's Seattle address. I didn't attend. I didn't send a gift. I didn't respond at all. The third was in 2020. My mother sent me an email, the first direct contact she'd initiated since throwing me out. The subject line was, "Checking in." The message mentioned that she'd seen an article in Seattle Business Journal about Myers Property Holdings expanding into the East Side market. She hoped I was doing well and suggested we should catch up sometime. I deleted the email without responding. I wasn't holding grudges. I had simply built a life that didn't include them, and I saw no reason to change that. In the summer of 2024, Uncle Harold received a diagnosis that changed everything. Congestive heart failure, advanced stage. The doctors gave him 12 to 18 months. He lasted 8. During those final months, Uncle Harold met with his estate attorney multiple times. He updated his will in June 2024, 6 months before he passed. When I asked him about it, he just smiled. "Everything's taken care of," he said. "You focus on the business. I've handled the rest." I didn't know what he'd written. I didn't know about the clauses. I trusted him completely. I had no idea what was coming. Uncle Harold passed away on February 28, 2025. He went peacefully in his sleep at Swedish Medical Center with me holding his hand. 1 week later, on March 7th, I was in my office at Myers Property Holdings when my phone buzzed with an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer. "Diana?" The voice was immediately recognizable. 15 years hadn't changed my mother's particular way of saying my name, like she was tasting something she wasn't sure she wanted to swallow. "Sandra." I kept my voice neutral, not Mom, just her name. A brief pause. I could almost hear her recalibrating. "I heard about Harold," she said. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I was thinking I should come up for the memorial service, pay my respects. The memorial was 3 days ago." Another pause. "Oh, well, I also heard there's a will reading coming up. Family has a right to attend these things, you know, especially when it involves a brother's estate." There it was, the real reason for the call. "How did you find out about the will reading?" "I have an attorney, Victor Harrington. He made some calls." The name sparked a faint memory. Uncle Harold had mentioned a Victor Harrington once, an attorney he'd consulted years ago and decided not to work with. I spoke to Margaret Morrison, Uncle Harold's estate attorney, the next morning. She confirmed my suspicions. Sandra had hired Victor Harrington to file a claim challenging the will. Their grounds: undue influence, alleging that I had manipulated a sick man in his final months. They were also demanding to attend the will reading as immediate family members of the deceased. I stared at the photo of Uncle Harold on my desk. In the picture, he was smiling. Almost like he'd known this would happen. Almost like he'd planned for it. Margaret Morrison's office occupied the 47th floor of the Columbia Center, Seattle's tallest building. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see all the way to Mount Rainier on a clear day. March 10th wasn't clear. Rain streaked the glass as Margaret laid out the situation. "Victor Harrington filed a formal challenge to the will on behalf of Richard and Sandra Myers," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "The claim alleges undue influence. They're arguing that you isolated Harold from his family during his illness and pressured him to change his estate plan." I read through the filing, my stomach tightening with each paragraph. "They're demanding 50% of the estate," Margaret continued. "Their legal theory is that as Harold's only surviving sibling, Richard should be entitled to inherit under intestacy rules, or at minimum, receive a significant share that reflects the natural bonds of brotherhood." "Natural bonds," I repeated. "Richard and Harold hadn't spoken in 8 years before I came to live with Uncle Harold. Did you know that?" Margaret nodded. "I'm aware. Harold told me the whole history, but that's not what concerns me about this filing." She pulled out another page from her folder. "They don't need to win this case. If this goes to litigation, the estate could be frozen for 12 to 18 months during discovery and trial. Meanwhile, the properties need management, tenants need attention, bills need to be paid." A protracted legal battle could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and potentially devalue the entire portfolio. So they're betting I'll pay them off to make them go away. That's the strategy, Margaret agreed. It's not unusual in estate disputes. I looked down at the challenge filing. In the section describing our family history, Sandra had written that I had abandoned my family and exploited Harold's loneliness. The woman who threw me out was claiming I abandoned her. Do you have any documentation about your circumstances in 2010? Margaret asked. Anything that establishes what actually happened when you went to live with Harold? I thought back to that night on the porch, the garbage bags, the 4-hour wait, Uncle Harold arriving in the darkness. I was 13, I said. I didn't exactly keep records. Harold did. Margaret was already reaching for her phone. She dialed her assistant and asked for a specific file number from the archives. 20 minutes later, her assistant returned with a yellowed folder. Margaret opened it carefully, scanning the contents. Then she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Diana, did you know about this? She slid the document across the desk. The header read, Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Transfer of Guardianship. Dated July 15, 2010. The document stated that Richard James Myers and Sandra Ellen Myers, being of sound mind, voluntarily relinquished all parental rights and responsibilities for their minor daughter, Diana Marie Myers, and transferred full legal guardianship to Harold Raymond Myers. At the bottom were 4 signatures: my mother's, my father's, Uncle Harold's, and a notary public from King County, Washington. File number 2010 GH 5847. They didn't just kick you out, Margaret said quietly. They legally gave you up. They signed away their parental rights. As far as the law is concerned, Sandra and Richard Myers stopped being your parents the moment they signed this document. My hands were trembling. I'd been 13 years old, sitting on a porch in the dark. I had no idea my mother had been signing papers inside the house. What does this mean for their claim? Margaret's expression shifted. It means Richard has no standing to claim inheritance through familial relationship. Legally, he's not your parent. He severed that connection himself, in writing, with witnesses 15 years ago. Margaret offered me 2 paths forward. Option 1, we negotiate, she said. I reach out to Harrington, explain that their legal position is weaker than they realize, and offer a settlement. $500,000 to $1 million in exchange for them withdrawing their challenge and signing a waiver of any future claims. It's faster, cleaner, and avoids any public spectacle. And option 2? We proceed with the will reading as scheduled. They've demanded to attend as family members. We let them. Then we present the evidence. The guardianship transfer document, the full history, everything Harold wanted disclosed in the event of a challenge. She paused. Harold anticipated this, Diana. He left specific instructions for how to handle exactly this scenario. He wanted the truth on the record. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room of the house Uncle Harold had left me, staring at the family photos on the mantel. There were pictures of me at every stage: high school graduation, college commencement, the day I got my CPA license, my first day as CFO. In every photo, Uncle Harold was beaming beside me. There were no photos of Richard or Sandra, not one. I thought about Uncle Harold's words from that email years ago. You don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself the truth. At 7 the next morning, I called Margaret. I want the will reading to proceed, I said. No settlement, no buyout. If they want to be present for this, let them. But we're not hiding anything. Are you sure? Once this becomes public, they chose to make this public when they filed their challenge. I'm just respecting their choice. The will reading was scheduled for Friday, March 14, 2025, at 2:00 p.m. in the Morrison & Associates conference room. 5 days away. The next few days were a blur of preparation. My best friend Elena Torres, we'd met when she joined Myers Property Holdings as HR director 3 years earlier, helped me organize the documentation. She was the only person besides Margaret who knew the full story of my childhood. 47 emails, Elena said, looking up from her laptop in my office on Wednesday evening. 47 emails from Harold to you over 10 years, documenting his relationship with you and his reasons for estranging himself from Richard. The emails painted a clear picture. In 2002, Richard had borrowed $80,000 from Harold with a promise to repay it within 5 years. 23 years later, not a single dollar had been returned. That broken promise had fractured their relationship. My arrival in 2010 had nothing to do with their estrangement. It had already been festering for 8 years. Elena also pulled the financial reports from my 3 years as CFO. Under my leadership, the Myers Property Holdings portfolio had grown from $17.7 million to $23.7 million, a 34% increase in value. Occupancy rates averaged 96%. Tenant satisfaction scores were the highest in the company's history. On Thursday evening, I met with Dr. Lauren Hayes, the therapist I'd been seeing since my early 20s. "Remember why you're doing this," she said. "You're not seeking revenge, you're closing a chapter. There's a difference." "What if I feel satisfaction when they realize they've lost?" Dr. Hayes smiled gently. "That's called justice, Diana. Feeling validated when the truth comes out isn't the same as cruelty. The question is what you do afterward." I drove home that night through Seattle's rain-slicked streets, thinking about her words. I looked in the bathroom mirror before bed. "She has no power over you anymore," I told my reflection. "Only you get to decide your story now." Friday was coming, and I was ready. Okay, let me pause here for a second. If you've made it this far, and you're wondering how I handled what came next, drop a comment with your prediction. What do you think Sandra did at the will reading? And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to set boundaries with family, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting to the part you've been waiting for. Now back to that Friday afternoon. The Morrison and Associates conference room occupied a corner of the 47th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. On a clear day, it would have been breathtaking. On March 14, 2025, the sky was overcast, the water a steel gray that matched my mood. I arrived 15 minutes early at 1:45 p.m. I wore a navy blue tailored suit. Professional, understated. My hair was pulled back in a simple bun. I'd learned from Uncle Harold that the most powerful people in the room never needed to announce themselves. The conference room could seat 20 at the main table, with additional chairs arranged along the walls. When I entered, 14 people were already present. Margaret Morrison sat at the head of the table with 2 junior associates. Thomas Graham, the senior auditor from Mitchell and Partners, who had handled Uncle Harold's accounts for a decade, occupied a seat near the window. Representatives from 3 charitable organizations filled several chairs: Seattle Children's Hospital, Habitat for Humanity Northwest, and the Olympic National Park Foundation. Uncle Harold had been a significant donor to all 3 for over 20 years. 5 senior staff members from Myers Property Holdings sat together near the door. They'd worked with Uncle Harold for years and had known me since my intern days. Margaret caught my eye and nodded toward a seat at the center of the table, directly across from where she would be reading the will. I took my place, arranging the folder of documents Elena had prepared in front of me. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see the elevator lobby. At 2:03 p.m., the elevator doors opened. My mother stepped out first. Even from across the floor, I could see she'd dressed for the occasion. Black dress, pearl necklace, full makeup. Behind her came my father, my sister, and a man in an expensive suit carrying a Mont Blanc briefcase. The show was about to begin. Sandra Myers entered the conference room like she owned it. That was always her way, projecting confidence she hadn't earned, claiming space she hadn't been given. She wore a black dress that looked new, and her pearl necklace caught the overhead lights as she surveyed the room with a practiced expression of dignified grief. Behind her, my father Richard shuffled in wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit anymore. He'd gained weight in the years since I'd seen him. His eyes found me briefly, then darted away. He'd always been good at looking away. Tiffany followed in a pastel pink dress, an odd choice for a will reading, like she'd gotten confused about what event she was attending. At 30, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the early morning flight from Portland. Their attorney, Victor Harrington, brought up the rear. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of polished confidence that came from decades of high-stakes litigation. His Mont Blanc briefcase probably cost more than my first month's salary at Mitchell and Partners. Sandra's gaze swept the room until it landed on me. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying in that way she'd perfected. "You're here already." I didn't stand. Sandra. The single word, her name, not Mom, made her pause mid-stride. Something flickered across her face. Then she recovered. "I was hoping we could speak privately before this starts. Family matters should be handled by family." "The proceedings begin in 2 minutes," I said. "I'm sure whatever you have to say can wait." Margaret Morrison rose from her seat. "Mrs. Myers, Mr. Myers, Ms. Myers, Mr. Harrington, there are seats arranged for attending parties along the wall. The main table is reserved for beneficiaries and estate representatives." Sandra's jaw tightened visibly. She'd expected a seat at the center of things. Instead, she was being directed to the margins. She wasn't even at the table. Sandra didn't take her seat quietly. Instead, she detoured past the representatives from Seattle Children's Hospital, pausing to introduce herself with an expression of practiced sorrow. "I'm Sandra Myers," she said, loud enough for most of the room to hear. "Harold's sister-in-law. We were quite close for many years, before this unfortunate estrangement." She glanced meaningfully in my direction. The hospital representative, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Patricia Wells, nodded politely but said nothing. Sandra continued, undeterred. "It's so tragic how some people come into a family and create division. Harold was such a generous man, so trusting, perhaps too trusting." I kept my eyes on my folder. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that Sandra fed on reactions. Tiffany, settling into a chair against the wall, added her piece. "Uncle Harold used to visit us in Portland all the time when we were kids. I don't understand why she gets to sit up there and we're back here." Victor Harrington was already taking notes, his pen moving across a legal pad, documenting everything, building their case, looking for any reaction he could twist. I gave him nothing. Sandra took her seat beside Tiffany, but she wasn't finished. As Margaret organized her papers at the head of the table, Sandra's voice cut through the quiet room once more. "A child who's been rejected by her parents usually has a reason. I just wish Harold had seen through her the way we did. A mother always knows." The words hung in the air. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Graham, the auditor, was staring at Sandra with open disbelief. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 15 years. She hadn't changed at all. The same certainty, the same need to control the narrative, the same absolute conviction that she was the victim. Margaret cleared her throat. "It's 2:10, we'll begin." Margaret Morrison broke the seal on a large envelope with the careful precision of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times. "This is the last will and testament of Harold Raymond Myers," she began, her voice carrying the formal weight the moment demanded. "Born July 4, 1953, deceased February 28, 2025. This document was executed on June 18, 2024, and represents the final expression of Mr. Myers's wishes regarding the disposition of his estate." Sandra sat forward slightly, her pearl necklace catching the light. Margaret continued reading the preliminary sections. Article 1 confirmed Harold's identity and residence. Article 2 declared him to be of sound mind. Margaret noted that a psychiatric evaluation had been conducted by Dr. Stephen Park on June 10, 2024, 8 days before the will was signed. The evaluation confirmed Mr. Myers possessed full testamentary capacity and was under no undue influence at the time of execution, Margaret read. I caught Sandra exchanging a glance with Victor Harrington. They'd been banking on challenging Harold's mental state. This documentation complicated their strategy. Article 3 revoked all prior wills and codicils. Then Margaret turned to Article 4, the inventory of assets. At the time of death, Mr. Myers' estate included the following: 12 commercial properties located throughout King County and Snohomish County with a combined assessed value of $18.2 million. Investment accounts containing diversified equity holdings valued at approximately $4.1 million. Cash and liquid assets totaling $1.4 million. I heard Tiffany whisper to Sandra, "That's almost $24 million." Sandra nodded, her eyes calculating. Margaret looked up briefly. The will contains 47 pages. I will now proceed to Article 5, which addresses specific bequests and exclusions. She turned the page and adjusted her reading glasses. Article 5, regarding Richard James Myers, brother of the deceased. Sandra actually smiled. She wouldn't be smiling for long. Margaret's voice was steady as she read the opening line. I make no provision in this will for my brother, Richard James Myers, for the following reasons, which I wish to be read aloud and entered into the record. Sandra's smile flickered. Margaret continued reading Harold's words. First, in March of 2002, Richard borrowed $80,000 from me with a written promise to repay the full amount within 5 years. 23 years have passed. Not $1 has been returned. I have retained the original promissory note as documentation. Richard's face went pale. He hadn't expected this. Second, on July 15, 2010, Richard and his wife Sandra voluntarily executed a legal document relinquishing all parental rights to their daughter Diana Marie Myers, transferring full guardianship to me. This document was properly witnessed and notarized. Sandra shot to her feet. What does that have to do with anything? Margaret paused, looked at Sandra over her glasses, and continued reading without acknowledging the outburst. The significance of this document is as follows. By legally terminating their parental relationship with Diana, Richard and Sandra severed any claim they might have had to inherit from me through her. Diana is my legal heir. Richard is not her legal father. Therefore, Richard has no familial relationship with my designated heir, and no standing to challenge this will on grounds of family connection. Richard stood now, too. This is ridiculous! I'm Harold's brother, his blood brother! Victor Harrington grabbed Richard's arm, pulling him back down. But even the attorney's face had gone gray. Margaret reached into her file and produced a document. For the record, the original voluntary relinquishment of parental rights is on file with King County Family Court, file number 2010 GH 5847. I have a certified copy here, which any party may examine. She laid the document on the table. Sandra stared at it like it was a live grenade. Sandra didn't sit back down. Her composure, that careful mask she'd worn into the room, cracked visibly. Her voice rose, sharp and desperate. This is insane! That paper doesn't mean anything. We're still her family. Margaret's voice remained level. Mrs. Myers, I must ask you to take your seat. Disrupting the reading of a will is a matter the court takes seriously. Sandra ignored her. She pointed directly at me. She did this. She manipulated Harold against his own family. She poisoned him against us. Dr. Patricia Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital looked uncomfortable. The charity representatives hadn't signed up for a family meltdown. Tiffany tugged at Sandra's sleeve. Mom, sit down. People are watching. I don't care who's watching, Sandra's voice cracked. I want to know how this happened. Harold loved Richard. They were brothers. Finally, I spoke. My voice came out calm, steady, the way Uncle Harold had taught me to speak in difficult negotiations. Never raise your voice. Make them strain to hear you. Sandra, you made a choice 15 years ago. You put my belongings in garbage bags and left me on a porch in the dark. Then you went inside and signed a document giving me away. I was 13 years old. The room was absolutely silent. That was your decision, I continued. Not mine, not Uncle Harold's, yours. Everything that's happening today is simply the consequence of what you chose to do that night. Sandra's mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked at her steadily. I don't hate you, but I also don't owe you anything. You made sure of that when you signed that paper. Victor Harrington was writing furiously on his legal pad, though I couldn't imagine what strategy he thought he could salvage. Margaret cleared her throat. If we may continue, I haven't yet read Clause 7. Sandra finally sank back into her chair, but Clause 7 was the one that would truly end her hopes. Margaret turned to page 12 of the will and paused. Then she read the words that would change everything. Article 7, Designation of Sole Beneficiary. The room held its breath. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real property, investment accounts, liquid assets, and personal effects, to my legally adopted daughter, Diana Marie Myers. Adopted. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sandra's face went white, actually white, like someone had drained the blood from her head. Adopted? Richard's voice was hoarse. Since when? Margaret answered with the same calm precision she'd used throughout. Mr. Harold Myers formally adopted Diana Marie Myers on September 12, 2012, when she was 15 years old. The adoption was finalized in King County Family Court, file number 2012 AD 3291. As Mr. and Mrs. Richard Myers had already legally relinquished their parental rights in 2010, no additional consent was required. Tiffany stared at me. So you're not related to us anymore? I met her eyes. Not legally. Not since Mom and Dad signed me away. Margaret continued reading. Diana is not merely a beneficiary. She is my daughter in every way that matters, legally, practically, and emotionally. She has worked alongside me for years, proven her competence and integrity, and I trust her completely to continue the work I began. There is no one more deserving of this inheritance, and no one I love more. My vision blurred. I blinked back tears. Uncle Harold had never told me about the full language of this clause. He'd kept it a secret, waiting for this moment, knowing it might come. Sandra was shaking her head slowly, like someone trying to wake from a nightmare. This can't be legal, she whispered. Victor, tell them this can't be legal. Victor Harrington didn't answer. He was staring at his legal pad, pen motionless. He knew the case was over. Margaret reached into her folder and withdrew a sealed envelope, smaller than the others. There's one more item, she said. Mr. Myers left a personal letter for Diana, with instructions that I offer to read a portion aloud during this proceeding, if Diana consents. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Margaret opened the envelope carefully and unfolded a single handwritten page. Uncle Harold's familiar script filled the paper, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and emails and notes left on my desk over 15 years. Margaret began to read. Diana, if this letter is being read aloud, it means things happened exactly as I expected. Your biological family showed up looking for money they never earned from a man they never cared about. I'm sorry you have to go through this, but I also know you're strong enough to handle it. A soft sound escaped Sandra's throat, almost a whimper. You came to me as a wounded child, thrown away by people who should have protected you, but you didn't let that define you. You transformed your pain into determination, your loneliness into independence, your rejection into resilience. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Margaret's voice softened slightly as she continued. I didn't save you, Diana. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it. Everything you've achieved, your education, your career, your character, you earned through your own effort. I'm leaving you my estate not because you need it, but because you deserve it. And because I know you'll use it to help others the way I tried to help you. Tears were streaming down my face now. I didn't try to stop them. Don't let them make you feel guilty for surviving them. Don't let them back in unless you choose to. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. I love you, Diana. Forever your father, Harold. Sandra made one last desperate play. She stood again, but this time her voice had shifted. The anger was gone, replaced by something that was meant to sound like wounded motherhood. Diana, sweetheart, I know things were hard when you were young. I made mistakes. I admit that now. But we're still blood. We can work through this. Can't we at least talk about dividing the estate fairly? I wiped my eyes and looked at her. You gave up the right to call me sweetheart 15 years ago. I want to contest this will, Sandra announced to the room. Victor, tell them. We have grounds. Undue influence. Harold was sick. She isolated him. Victor Harrington finally spoke, though he sounded like a man reading his own obituary. Mrs. Myers, perhaps we should discuss our options privately. No, tell them, we're going to fight this, Margaret interrupted by turning her iPad around to face the room. On the screen was an email thread. Mr. Harrington, perhaps you'd like to explain this to your clients. The room went quiet. Margaret read aloud. This is an email dated March 3, 2022, from Harold Myers to Victor Harrington. The subject line is terminating services. In the email, Mr. Myers writes, Victor, I am ending our professional relationship. Your advice that I include Richard in my estate plan despite his years of financial exploitation and his treatment of Diana is unacceptable. I will be engaging new counsel. She looked up at Victor. You previously represented Harold Myers. You were terminated because you advocated for Richard's interests over Harold's wishes. And now you've accepted this case against Harold's estate, without disclosing that conflict of interest to your current clients. Victor's face had gone the color of old concrete. Sandra turned to stare at him. You told me we would win. He had no answer. Victor Harrington stood up abruptly, gathering his Mont Blanc briefcase with shaking hands. I need to review these documents, he said, his voice stripped of its earlier polish. We should discuss our options privately, Mrs. Myers. Discuss what? Sandra's voice was rising again. You're leaving? Right now? In the middle of this? Victor didn't answer. He was already moving toward the door, walking with the stiff gait of a man who knew his career might be imploding. Victor! Sandra called after him. Victor! The conference room door closed behind him with a soft click. Sandra stood frozen, abandoned by her own attorney in front of everyone she'd hoped to impress. Richard hadn't said a word in minutes. He sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. He'd spent his whole life following Sandra's lead, and now she had led them both off a cliff. Tiffany was crying quietly. I couldn't tell if she was upset about the money or about the public humiliation. Sandra turned back to me one more time. The mask was completely gone now. Underneath it was just desperation, and beneath that, something that might have been the first stirrings of real regret. Diana, her voice broke. We can still, we're still a family, aren't we? Blood is blood. You could still. I stood up from the table. Sandra, you stopped being my family on July 15th, 2010. You signed the document yourself. I didn't make that choice, you did. I gathered my folder and looked at her steadily. I don't hate you. I actually feel sorry for you, but you have no claim on me. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that matters. I turned to Margaret. Can we continue with the remaining articles? Margaret nodded. Sandra sat down heavily. She didn't speak again for the rest of the reading. Margaret turned to the next section with practiced calm. Article 9, Charitable Bequests. The representatives from the 3 charitable organizations straightened in their seats. I direct that the following gifts be made from my estate. $500,000 to Seattle Children's Hospital, to be used for the establishment of a scholarship fund for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. $300,000 to Habitat for Humanity Northwest, for the construction of affordable housing in the greater Seattle area. $200,000 to the Olympic National Park Foundation, for wilderness preservation and environmental education programs. Dr. Patricia Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital nodded solemnly. Harold was one of our most consistent donors for over 2 decades. This gift will help hundreds of families. The representative from Habitat for Humanity added, We've built 6 homes with Harold's previous donations. This will fund at least 4 more. Margaret continued. I also request that my daughter Diana continue the charitable giving programs I established during my lifetime, at her discretion. I trust her judgment completely. I found my voice. I will. I'll honor everything Uncle Harold built. A thought occurred to me as I looked at the 3 charity representatives sitting in this room. They weren't here because the law required it. They were here because Uncle Harold had asked them to come. He'd wanted witnesses, neutral parties who could testify to exactly what had happened here today if Sandra and Richard tried to pursue their case further. Uncle Harold had anticipated every move. Dr. Wells caught my eye and offered a small, kind smile. Harold used to talk about you constantly. Every board meeting, every donor event. Diana did this. Diana achieved that. He was so proud of you. I blinked back fresh tears. Even in death, Uncle Harold had surrounded me with people who believed in me. When Margaret finished reading the final articles of the will, she turned to me. Diana, as sole beneficiary and executor, would you like to say a few words? I hadn't planned to speak, but 47 pairs of eyes were watching me, and I realized there were things that needed to be said, not for Sandra's benefit, but for my own. I rose from my seat. Most of you knew Uncle Harold far longer than I did. He took me in when I was 13 years old and had nothing. He gave me a home, an education, and most importantly, a family that chose to love me. I looked around the room, at the Myers Property Holdings employees who had watched me grow from an intern into a CFO, at the charity representatives who had witnessed Uncle Harold's generosity for decades. With this inheritance, I intend to continue everything Harold built. The properties will be managed with the same integrity he established. The charitable commitments will be maintained, and I'll be establishing a new scholarship fund, the Myers STEM Scholarship, for children from difficult family situations who need someone to believe in them. My eyes found Sandra, still sitting rigid in her chair. As for my biological relatives, I hold no grudge. I've made peace with what happened. But peace doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen, and it doesn't mean opening doors that I've worked hard to close. I took a breath. Harold taught me that family is about choice. The people who show up for you when everything falls apart, those are your family. By that definition, the people in this room who knew Harold, who worked with him, who respected him, you're more my family than the people who share my DNA. I sat back down. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Thomas Graham, the auditor, began to clap. Others followed. Sandra didn't move. Margaret formally concluded the reading at 3:47 p.m. The will has been read in its entirety. All legal requirements have been satisfied. Ms. Myers, you may contact our office next week to begin the transfer process. The estate should be fully settled within 14 business days. People began to rise, conversations murmuring to life around the room. Sandra stood slowly, like a woman who had aged 10 years in 2 hours. Richard was already shuffling toward the door, not looking at anyone. Tiffany gathered her purse and followed her father without a word. Sandra lingered. She turned back to look at me one final time. Her makeup had smeared slightly around her eyes. The confident woman who had entered this room expecting millions now looked diminished, smaller somehow. She opened her mouth as if to say something. I saw her lips form what might have been the beginning of "I'm sorry." But then she closed her mouth, turned away, and walked out. I watched her go. This woman who had thrown me away like damaged goods, who had signed papers to make it legal, who had shown up 15 years later, expecting to profit from her cruelty. I felt a brief flicker of something, not satisfaction exactly, not vindication, something more complicated, the strange emptiness that comes when a chapter finally closes. Dr. Wells from Seattle Children's Hospital approached me as the room cleared. Harold talked about you every time we met, she said, shaking my hand. He told me once that taking you in was the best decision he ever made. I can see why. She pressed a business card into my palm. When you're ready to discuss that scholarship fund, please call me directly. Elena appeared at my side, squeezing my arm. You did it, she said quietly. Harold would be so proud. I looked at the photo of Uncle Harold I'd brought with me. I hoped she was right. I need to take a breath here for a second. That was the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for at the same time. If you've ever had to stand up to someone who hurt you, someone who still believed they were the victim, you know how exhausting it is. Have you been through something similar? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to know what happened after that conference room emptied, stay with me. The story isn't over. 1 week after the will reading, Margaret Morrison filed a formal complaint with the Washington State Bar Association. The subject, Victor Harrington's ethical violations. I didn't ask her to do it. She did it because it was her professional obligation. When an attorney witnesses another attorney violating the rules of professional conduct, reporting is required. The complaint outlined 3 violations. First, conflict of interest. Harrington had previously represented Harold Myers and gained confidential information about his estate planning. Second, failure to disclose. Harrington never told Sandra or Richard about his prior relationship with Harold. Third, misrepresentation. Harrington had led his clients to believe they had a strong case when he knew, or should have known, that their legal position was fundamentally compromised. Margaret kept me updated throughout the process. 2 months after the filing, in late May 2025, the Bar Association issued its ruling. Victor Harrington was suspended from practicing law for 6 months. He was also fined $15,000 and required to complete additional ethics training. Within weeks of the suspension, 3 of Harrington's largest clients quietly transferred their business elsewhere. I heard through legal community gossip that his firm's revenue dropped by roughly $200,000 that year. Elena asked me once if I felt satisfied by Harrington's downfall. I didn't do anything to him, I told her. He did this to himself. I just happened to be there when the consequences caught up. That was the truth. I hadn't sought revenge against Victor Harrington. I hadn't filed the complaint. I hadn't lobbied for his suspension. He had made his own choices, taking a case he knew was ethically compromised, lying to clients who trusted him, betting he could win through intimidation rather than merit. His career suffered because of what he chose to do. Some people build their own prisons without any help. 3 weeks after the will reading, an email appeared in my inbox from Sandra Myers, 1969, gmail.com. Subject, please read. The message was longer than I expected. Sandra had never been one for written communication. She preferred phone calls where she could control the tone, interrupt, redirect. Diana, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say some things. I've been thinking about what happened at the will reading. I was angry, and I said things I shouldn't have, but I want you to know that I understand now that I made mistakes when you were young. I was overwhelmed. Your father and I were struggling financially. Things got away from us. I'm not asking for money, I'm asking for a chance to make things right. We're still family, Diana. Blood doesn't just disappear because of legal papers. I'm your mother. Nothing can change that. Can we talk? I think if we just sat down together, we could work through this. I love you. I always have. Mom. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Dr. Hayes, my therapist, and read it to her over the phone. What do you notice about the email? She asked. I thought about it. She acknowledges mistakes but doesn't name what they were. She blames circumstances, financial struggles, being overwhelmed. She says she's not asking for money, but then pivots to working through this. And she still calls herself mom, even though she signed away that right. What do you want to do? I took 2 days to write my response. It was 4 sentences long. Sandra, I've read your email. I forgave you a long time ago, for myself, not for you. But I don't want a relationship with you. Please don't contact me again. She didn't reply. I felt no guilt, only clarity. 2 months after the will reading, a letter arrived at my Seattle address. Not an email. An actual letter, handwritten on plain paper, stuffed into a slightly wrinkled envelope with a Portland postmark. The return address listed T. Warren. Tiffany had taken her ex-husband's name when she got married. I opened it reluctantly, expecting more manipulation. What I found was different. Diana, I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I don't want money. I don't want forgiveness. I just need to say something I should have said 15 years ago. The night Mom and Dad kicked you out, I was watching from my bedroom window. I saw you sitting on the porch with those garbage bags. I watched for 4 hours. I saw you alone in the dark waiting and I never came down. I could have. I was 15. I could have brought you water or sat with you or at least told you I was sorry. Instead, I just watched from the window like a coward. That's haunted me ever since. Every time Mom would talk about you, always blaming you, always making herself the victim, I would think about that window, about what I didn't do. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did was wrong. I failed you when you needed family most. You deserved better from your older sister. If you never want to hear from me again, I understand. But I couldn't let another year pass without telling you the truth. Tiffany. I read the letter 4 times. It was the first honest thing anyone in my biological family had ever said to me. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time to figure out what, if anything, I wanted to do with this unexpected opening. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than distance when I thought about my sister. 4 months after the will reading, I finally wrote back to Tiffany. Dr. Hayes had helped me think through what I actually wanted, not what I felt obligated to do, not what would look generous or forgiving, what I genuinely wanted for myself. The answer surprised me. I didn't want to shut Tiffany out completely. Her letter had been the first honest acknowledgement of what happened that night. No excuses, no deflection, no requests for money, just accountability. But I also wasn't ready to trust her. 15 years of distance doesn't disappear because of one letter. So I wrote back with conditions. Tiffany, I've read your letter many times. I appreciate that you acknowledged what happened without making excuses. That took courage. I'm not ready for a full relationship, but I'm open to cautious contact under these conditions. First, no contact through Mom or Dad. I've ended communication with them permanently, and I need that boundary respected. Second, no discussions about money, inheritance, or anything related to Uncle Harold's estate. Ever. Third, I reserve the right to end any conversation without explanation. If I go quiet, I need you to respect that. If these conditions work for you, we can start with a monthly video call. 15 minutes, low pressure. We can talk about our lives, surface level at first. If that goes well, we can gradually build from there. This isn't me saying everything is forgiven and forgotten. This is me saying I'm willing to see if there's something worth building, but it has to be on my terms. Let me know if you accept these conditions. Diana. Her reply came 3 days later. One word. Accepted. I scheduled our first call for the following Saturday. 15 minutes. That was all I could commit to. But it was a start. The first video call with Tiffany happened on a Saturday afternoon in September 2025, 6 months after the will reading. I sat in my home office with my laptop open, watching the seconds count down until 2:00 p.m. My heart was beating faster than it had during the will reading. This felt more dangerous somehow. Confronting Sandra had been about defending myself against an attack. This was about choosing to be vulnerable. The call connected. Tiffany's face filled the screen. She looked different than she had at the will reading, less made up, more tired, but also somehow more real. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We stared at each other for a moment. 15 years compressed into a video call rectangle. "I wasn't sure you'd actually answer," she admitted. "I almost didn't." That broke something loose. Tiffany laughed, a nervous, relieved sound, and I found myself almost smiling. We kept it light, as I'd requested. Surface level. She told me about her job. She was training to become a nail technician, working toward getting licensed. She mentioned her kids, Jaden, 8, and Lily, 6, without asking me to be their aunt. I told her about the business, about Seattle weather, about nothing too personal. At 14 minutes, I said we should wrap up. Diana? Tiffany's voice stopped me before I could end the call. Thank you for giving me a chance. I know you didn't have to. This is step one, I said. We'll see where it goes. Step one is more than I expected. We scheduled another call for the following month. After she hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, processing. I didn't know if Tiffany and I would ever have a real relationship. Maybe we'd stay in this tentative place forever. But for the first time, I was the one deciding what happened next. That power was worth more than the inheritance. March 14th, 2026. 1 year exactly since the will reading that changed everything. I stood outside a modest commercial building on Capitol Hill, the first property Uncle Harold ever purchased, back in 1987, when he was a 34-year-old with a dream and barely enough money for a down payment. The building had been renovated last fall. New windows, updated HVAC, fresh landscaping. But today I was here for something else. A bronze plaque had been mounted beside the main entrance, the Harold R. Myers Building, in memory of a man who chose love over blood, 1953 to 2025. I touched the letters of his name, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips. In the years since the will reading, Myers' property holdings had grown by 12%, bringing the portfolio value to $26.5 million. Occupancy rates remained above 95%. We'd expanded into 2 new properties and upgraded 3 existing ones. More importantly, the Myers STEM Scholarship had awarded its first grants. 5 students from difficult family situations, each receiving full funding for summer programs in science and mathematics. Dr. Wells at Seattle Children's Hospital had helped select the recipients. Tiffany and I still talked once a month. The conversations had gotten slightly easier. We'd graduated from 15 minutes to 25. I'd seen pictures of her kids. She'd seen pictures of my apartment. We weren't sisters in any traditional sense, but we were something. Sandra and Richard had stopped trying to contact me. I didn't know what their lives looked like now, and I found that I didn't need to know. Elena walked up beside me, looking at the plaque. You okay? I considered the question. I'm peaceful, I said. That's even better than happy. Uncle Harold had taught me that family is a choice, and I had finally learned to choose myself. The sky over Seattle was clear for the first time in weeks. I could see all the way to the mountains. If I look at my own story through a psychological lens, there's a concept called conditional self-worth, the belief that you're only valuable if certain people approve of you. I spent the first 13 years of my life trapped in that belief. My mother's indifference felt like proof that I didn't matter. What actually saved me wasn't Uncle Harold's money, it was his unconditional acceptance. He saw me for who I was, not who I should have been. Here's what I want you to take from this story. You don't need anyone's permission to know your worth, and you have every right to set boundaries, even with family, even with parents, even with blood. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Reconciliation is something you choose for yourself. These are 2 different things, and no one gets to decide which one you offer. Your story is yours to write. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to find your own worth after someone tried to take it away, I hope you know you're not alone. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And check the description for links to similar stories about boundaries, family, and finding your own way. Until next time, take care of yourself.